time for a quick recap of this week, and we begin in Afghanistan. It's just the tip of international conflicts. We jumped in too fast, went in further than we originally intended, and now we're pulling out way more slowly than we said we would. Peace talks were supposed to take place this week between the Taliban and the Afghan government, but on Wednesday there was a big development.
Breaking news out of Afghanistan right now. The government there says the Taliban leader Mullah Mohammed Omar is dead.
OK, well, that's probably going to affect those talks then. The Taliban has lost its key figure, and that's going to be difficult. You know, it's not unlike when 2.5 Men lost Charlie Sheen. Yes, the guy was a nightmare, but he was undeniably the figurehead of the whole terrible enterprise. Now, the US knew surprisingly little about Mullah Omar. In fact, this was the government's wanted poster, featuring vivid descriptions like hair black, nationality Afghan, and height tall, which is pretty non-specific. If you're a basketball player, tall is 7 feet. But if you're writing your own profile on OkCupid, it can mean 5'6". There's a discrepancy there. It had actually been a while since we had seen Mullah Omar, although, as we found out later this week, there was actually a pretty good explanation for that.
Afghan officials said today Mullah Omar died of hepatitis in 2013, but his death was kept secret by the Taliban for more than 2 years.
Yeah. It turns out he's been dead for 2 years, and the Taliban simply hadn't mentioned it. I don't know why. Maybe they were just trying to break it to their members gently. Oh, Mullah Omar, he's fine. He's living on a farm upstate where he can run and play with all the other Taliban leaders that you haven't seen for a while. He's so happy. You'll see him soon. This actually put the Taliban, though, in something of an awkward position because they were still releasing statements from him as recently as 2 weeks ago. They've essentially been full-on weekend at Bernie'sing him for the last 2 years. In fact, so much so that in April they even published his biography saying, among other things, that he does not own a home and has no foreign bank accounts, and Mullah Omar is tranquil and does not lose his temper, which I guess was technically true, although it would also have been fair to say he's on a disciplined diet and has been spending a lot of time in his garden. But the point is, by the end of the week, the game was clearly up and the Taliban announced a new leader, although details seemed a little light.
The new leader is Mullah Akhtar Mohammad Mansour. He's been the Taliban's second-in-command and deputy leader since 2010. He was formerly the militant group's Minister of Civil Aviation and Transportation. Wait. They went with the former Transportation Minister? That would be like if President Obama's successor were our current Transportation Secretary, Evelyn Sargent. And by the way, that's a stock photo of a woman we found online, and Evelyn Sargent is a made-up name. The point is, you don't know who the Secretary of Transportation is. Nobody does, because they're not supposed to be in line for the top job in any organisation. Also, I have to say, that's not a lot of information to go on. Even the photo of him is blurry, so frankly, I dread to think what the new government profile on him is going to look like. Hair, black. Height, yes. Face, probably. Ears, between 0 and 2. So, let's move on to some good news out of Chechnya. A sentence uttered almost as infrequently as, man, I hope I get seated next to a baby. Chechnya delivered a very unusual victory in the war on terror this week.
3 young Chechen women have apparently had more success battling ISIL than some fighting forces. They swindled ISIL fighters out of thousands of dollars.
The trio made the fighters think they would be their brides. The plot went like this. The girls would meet ISIL recruiters online, but tell them they had no money to travel from Chechnya to Syria. That's when ISIL would offer to send them the funds.
Holy shit! They catfished ISIS! They catfished ISIS! And it just goes to show, forget the CIA, there are no more intimidating psyops masterminds in the world of warfare than scheming teenage girls. They will take you down. They are mean. The girls actually took in over $3,000 before they got caught, and the details are fantastic.
He tried to pull me in, asked me if I wanted to come to Syria and that I'd like it. I said I had no money, and he said he'd help.
The girls received the money but never traveled to Syria. Instead, they blocked the ISIL fighter they were communicating with and moved on to the next target.
Oh, they just blocked him. That is cold. They didn't even send one last message saying, really busy, can't get into a thing right now, but you are great, it was fun talking to you, exclamation marks. They humiliated him so badly, I can't believe I'm actually feeling sorry for someone in ISIS. So I have to ask, what's going to happen to these 3 Chechen girls? Are we talking a parade in their honour, statues with pixelated faces? What's it going to be?
It's unclear, though, whether they will receive any punishment for the scam.
Punishment? You can't punish these girls. Scamming ISIS is the best thing anyone did on Earth this week. It's basically the exact opposite of shooting a lion with a bow and arrow. These 3 girls are the anti-dentists. They must be celebrated. We must honour them. So finally this week, the United Kingdom, America's before photo. Britain found itself in a parliamentary scandal this week after the Sun newspaper released a bombshell video.
The British lawmaker has quit Parliament in the wake of a drug and prostitution scandal. Lord Saul is facing a criminal investigation after a video came out this weekend purportedly showing him taking drugs with prostitutes.
That's him snorting what looks like cocaine with a couple of prostitutes. Lounging in the prostitute's bra, the 69-year-old married father brags about having more than a dozen marital affairs.
Okay. There's obviously a lot to unpack there. The cocaine, the prostitutes, the orange bra, which somehow seems to be a perfect fit for a 69-year-old's married father. I'm not saying what he did was right, I'm saying he knows his own body, good for him. Now, Lord Saul, seen here dressed as Jeffrey Dahmer, dressed as Santa Claus, was forced to resign as Deputy Speaker of the House of Lords after the Sun's video was released. And it wasn't just what he was doing in the video that was controversial, it's what he was saying.
We could do with some nice little young Asian lady, I would have thought tonight, but never mind. Sort of look innocent, but you know they're whores.
Okay. Ignoring the obvious racism and sexism for a moment, I'll say this for Lord Saul. We could have done with a nice Asian lady, but never mind, is an incredibly polite way of registering a complaint at a coke-fueled orgy. The guy has manners. But, as we learned elsewhere in the footage, Lord Saul is nothing if not spectacularly polite.
So you want to get some coke?
Well, I mean,
yeah,
enjoy it a little.
No one enjoys cocaine a little. Cocaine is like ISIS or insane clown posse. It's not for everyone, but the people who like it to a life-destroying extent. Call your parents, Sean, they don't know what's happening to you. And look, we don't have time, I'm afraid, to get into every aspect of this video, such as the fact that Saul snorted cocaine through a £5 note, meaning the cocaine had to traverse the Queen's face en route to his nose, or that he reportedly insisted on turning a framed photo of his wife face down on a table before snorting cocaine off the prostitute's, and I'm quoting the tabloids here, boobs. And it's a good thing he did, otherwise he would have heard his wife's nagging voice in his head the whole time. You're spilling cocaine everywhere, dear. There's an extra bit you missed on the boob. Waste not, want not. Now, until he resigned, there was actually one more glorious tidbit.
The Telegraph reports that he could become the first peer to be expelled from the House under new rules that he helped put in place.
He wrote the rules. The only way this could be any more ironic is if he wrote them on the back of a picture of his wife, which he then rolled up to snort cocaine off a prostitute's boob. It's just so great. Now, let me give you some quick context on the House of Lords itself, because it's perhaps even stupider than this story. It consists of nearly 800 members, almost all of whom got lifetime appointments from prime ministers, who meet to review laws passed by the House of Commons in a room so gaudy it looks like the tomb Liberace's dog was buried in. These are, by definition, a privileged group, as you can tell from their ridiculous titles, such as, and these are all real, the Lord Ponsonby of Shalbrede and Baron Soulsby of Swaffham Prior. And yet, they can claim a daily allowance for attendance and travel from the taxpayer, something that sticks in your throat a bit. In fact, one of Lord Sewell's guests actually asked him about this in the video.
200 a day? How, that is, it's the my work gets me 200 a day to buy lunch.
It's not lunch, lovey darling, it's paying for this.
Oh, this guy is incredible. Oh, don't worry, lovey darling. I'm not wasting that money on lunch. I'm wasting it on cocaine and, as I said before, insufficiently Asian whores. And look, by the way, this is just the latest in a long line of scandals involving the House of Lords, and yet significant reform still doesn't seem to be on the cards, which is crazy. Britain spends a lot of money on the House of Lords and gets virtually nothing back, and frankly, maybe they should take a lesson from America here. Because when this country subsidises the lifestyle of a horny, casually racist arsehole, at least we all get 4 Lethal Weapon movies out of it. And now, this.
And now, 10 actual titles of current members of the British House of Lords, paired with photos of pets who look like they would have that name. The Lord Wrigglesworth, the Lord Phillips of Worth Matravers, the Baroness Young of Old Scone, the Lord Hennessy of Nymphsfield, the Baroness Farrington of Ribbleton, the Lord Marlsford, the Baroness Kinnock of Holyhead, the Lord Griffiths of Forest Falk, the Baroness Liddell of Coatdyke, and the Lord Baker of Dorking.
Moving on. Our main story tonight concerns America, land of the free, home of the brave, inventor of Chinese food. Now, as you know, America is made up of 50 states. As a child, you may have been forced to learn to sing them in order.
Alabama and Alaska, Arizona, Arkansas, California, Colorado, Connecticut, and more.
Kansas, Kentucky, Louisiana, Maine, Maryland, Massachusetts, and good old Michigan. Texas and Utah, Vermont, I'm almost through. Virginia and there's Washington and West Virginia too. Go to Wisconsin, be the last one, or the 49. No, Wyoming is the last one, and the 50 states are mine.
That is impressive, especially because that is a difficult song. The British version is a little simpler. It goes like this. England, Scotland, Northern Ireland, Wales, and now this song is done. And that's it. That's it. And to be fair, I will say the song used to be a lot longer. But of course, 50 states does not quite tell the whole American story. You might remember earlier this year we talked about US territories like Puerto Rico and Guam, but there is one other US population which suffers a lack of representation in DC, and that's DC itself. If you've ever visited, you probably noticed their license plates say taxation without representation, and that's for a pretty good reason.
Washington, D.C. isn't like your typical city in America. Congress has the final say over its budget and laws, and D.C. does not have full representation on the Hill.
The Chinese pandas at the National Zoo have as much right to representation in the U.S. Congress as any resident in the District of Columbia.
Okay. But to be fair, that is probably for the best. We don't need those pandas participating in representative democracy. We need them fucking. And we need them to fuck a lot. So don't get squeamish about this. They're endangered. The voting rights of Mai Zhang and Chan Chan can wait. Right now, it's fuck o'clock, you weird biochromatic raccoons on steroids. Take a trip to Pound Town, pronto! But look, you can understand why many people in DC are angry, because think about it. They pay federal taxes and fight in wars, and yet have no member of Congress who's able to vote on their behalf, even though their population is larger than Vermont and Wyoming, and their gross domestic product is higher than that of 16 states. And if you're thinking, well, isn't this just how countries treat their capital cities? It actually isn't. We're the only democracy in the world that does this. In fact, when the Dalai Lama came to visit, he wondered why a small pocket of people living in the world's champion of democracy lacked full voting rights, calling it quite strange, quite strange. And it is not good when a guy from Tibet says, wow, this situation is really undemocratic. Someone should do something about it. Does Richard Gere know about this? Someone should tell him. Now, to be fair, DC does have a member of Congress, Eleanor Holmes Norton, but there are some strict limits on her powers.
I vote in committee, but I cannot do that which every American would believe is emblematic of citizenship. And that is vote on the House floor, vote on whether your taxes go up or go down, vote on whether you go to war or not. Can't do that.
So she basically has pretend power, like a child watching Dora the Explorer. Oh, yeah, Dora took her map out of her backpack because you told her to. Just keep believing that, you tiny idiot. Just grow up. And for more than 2 decades, she's introduced bill after bill to grant DC either statehood or a vote in Congress. And by the way, you do not want to interrupt her while she's arguing for it. Someone tried 8 years ago, and it did not work out too well for them.
And gave us home rule. I will not yield, sir. The District of Columbia has spent 206 years yielding. The people who would deny them the vote, I yield you no ground. Not during my time. You have had your say, and your say has been that you think that the people who live in your capital are not entitled to a vote in their house. Shame on you.
Yeah. That is fantastic. It's like Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, except she was already in Washington and doesn't have the power to do anything. At this point, it might be helpful to just take a moment and explain how DC got into this mess. Back in the late 1700s, there was no permanent US capital. It was just wherever Congress met, meaning it was in 8 different cities. But after Congress was mobbed by veterans demanding back pay in the Pennsylvania Mutiny of 1783, they decided they needed an enclave under their own control. So they added a clause to the Constitution which said that Congress shall have the power to exercise exclusive legislation in all cases whatsoever over a federal district, which is pretty significant power. As far as documents demanding control go, it's right up there with the one Christian Grey asked Anastasia Steele to sign in 50 Shades of Grey before he, I don't know, pinched her butt or whatever. I haven't seen it for obvious reasons. Jamie Dornan was and remains #not my Christian. But DC went under federal control in 1801, and it wasn't until the 1960s that DC's then 750,000 citizens, mostly African-American, were given even the most basic electoral rights.
Until 1964, residents could not even vote in presidential elections. It took a constitutional amendment to bestow that right. A few years later, Congress granted limited home rule, allowing D.C. voters to elect a mayor and city council, but required all legislation, including the city's budget, be subject to congressional approval.
And with that level of restriction, the mayor of DC gets to run the city the way a student council president gets to run her high school. Oh, sure, Kelsey, pick the theme for prom, but we'll control the budget, and Eyes Wide Shut is not an acceptable theme. We are not having a repeat of last year. It was a mess, and it was surprisingly boring. Now, to be fair here, Congress very rarely rejects DC's decisions outright, which sounds good. Unfortunately, instead, they attach so-called riders to DC's appropriations bills, stripping out funding for things that they don't like. And given that DC is a fairly liberal and diverse city, and Congress is frequently neither of those things, over the years, Congress has repeatedly stepped in whenever DC is about to do something that they might disapprove of. For example, just last November, 70% of Washingtonians voted to legalize possession of marijuana, and DC's residents were pretty excited about that.
This strain is a strain called Mrs. Buttersworth.
It is illegal, what you're doing right now.
Very much.
It won't be illegal tomorrow, correct?
That is correct.
What is that like, to come out of the shadows, as it were?
It's literally, for me, literally coming out of the closet. I can literally take my tent out of this closet.
At long last, my tent can come out of its closet, and the hydroponic plant inside it can proudly say, I'm here. My side effects include drowsiness, the desire to make claws out of bugles on your fingertips, and fear. Get used to it. Get used to it, because I'm here, and I look good. But then Republicans in Congress stepped in and passed a rider forbidding DC from using their funds to enact that law. And if you're wondering how that squares with the conservative ethos of limited government and states' rights, well, here is how one of those congressmen justified it.
Well, Washington, D.C. is not a state, and Washington, D.C. has a lot to offer, but, you know, free reign on marijuana use, I just don't buy that. I just don't think that's the way they should operate. So states' rights, yes, but Washington, D.C. is not a state.
You know you have a weak argument when you're clinging to the precise wording you used. Hey, I said I wouldn't fuck any other women. This is my squash mate, Gary. Having sex with women, no, but Gary is not a woman. You stay here, Gary, let her leave. Now, DC managed to find a loophole that let them enact that marijuana law anyway, but other laws have not been so lucky. For nearly a decade, Congress successfully blocked DC from using its own tax dollars to fund a needle exchange program to battle the HIV epidemic. And one of the men responsible for that, Georgia Representative Bob Barr, explained why.
I would also remind our colleagues of a very basic principle. If you give people the means to do something and encourage them to do it, well, for heaven's sake, no surprise, they will do it.
Okay, that is just ridiculous, because providing clean needles to drug users is not the same as putting out a bowl of chips at a party. No one sees a needle exchange and thinks, well, I had no intention of ever taking heroin, but seeing as you've offered, you know what, don't mind if I do. How kind. I don't want to be rude. But it's a little hard to hear him object to DC funding needle exchanges when you hear a little fact later mentioned by one of his colleagues.
I trust that Mr. Barr is aware that Georgia has a needle exchange program.
Yes, Georgia had a needle exchange program too. And what did Representative Barr think that theirs was for? Injecting peach cobbler intravenously? Oh, I couldn't eat another bite, but I sure as shit ain't done yet. Fill me up. Let me ride the peach, y'all. Let me ride the peach. And here's the thing. There were consequences to that rider. In the 9 years that DC was denied its needle exchanges, more than 1,500 injection drug users were diagnosed with HIV in the district. And interestingly, since DC finally funded their needle exchanges in 2008, HIV diagnosis linked to injecting drugs went down by 87%. Because of course they did. Needle exchanges are always preferable to the alternative. Try and think of needles as bridesmaid dresses. Anyone who tells you you can reuse them does not have your best interests at heart. Just eat the $200 and throw it away, Cheryl. She screwed you. She screwed all the girls. It seems that Congress just forces riders on DC whenever they disapprove of how they're spending their own money. They are treating more than 600,000 people right now like children. And in case you think I'm exaggerating, listen to Florida Congressman John Mica explain why DC should not get full control over their budget.
Well, when my kids were young teenagers, they always wanted budget autonomy too.
So you believe district leaders are children? Is that what you're saying? They're not ready?
No, but they have matured. We just don't want regression.
No, I'm not. No, I'm not saying they're children. I'm just saying they can't be trusted with money until they learn some responsibility, and until then, we should give them an allowance. You know, now that I'm hearing it out loud, I am calling them children. That is absolutely what I'm doing. But the award for the most depressingly cynical thing that has ever been said about DC actually goes to our current president, who in 2011 avoided a government shutdown by striking a deal with John Boehner that included prohibiting DC from spending its own money on abortions for low-income women, saying, and I quote, "John, I will give you DC abortion. I'm not happy about it." And the only time trading away DC abortion would be acceptable is if DC abortion is a rare 1950s comic book and you're getting Marvel's The Amazing Mammogram in return. That is it. Otherwise, that's not great. Look, the people of DC clearly deserve a greater voice in their own affairs, and they've actually come tantalisingly close to getting a voting representative in Congress. In 2009, a bill to give DC a vote was introduced in the Senate, and the Senate did the most dickish thing imaginable, passing it, but with a little addition.
Well, you know, they passed a major hurdle today, getting this D.C. voting rights bill through the Senate, but not without a highly controversial amendment attached to it. This amendment would repeal all of D.C.'s gun control laws.
Oh, she's not kidding. That amendment would have repealed their ban on semi-automatic weapons, removed criminal penalties for unregistered firearms, and even altered their ability to enact future gun control legislation. It was the kind of amendment NRA CEO Wayne LaPierre dreams about as he sleeps in his bullet-filled bathtub, I presume. As a result of that amendment, the bill was dropped, and DC has not been close to getting a vote since. And the problem is, even if they eventually get one, Congress could still add riders to mess with DC's laws. And that's why many Washingtonians want full statehood. But that's probably a long shot, because last year, Congress held its first hearing on DC statehood in 21 years, and the turnout was not encouraging.
The sad thing was only two senators of that committee actually showed up to listen to testimony today.
That's pathetic. That's pathetic.
Yeah, it was.
Only 2 turned up. That's not just a pathetic attendance for a hearing on Capitol Hill. That would be pathetic for a 1-year-old's birthday party. Really, Mikey? Just your mum and dad? You haven't made any other friends in an entire year. Put yourself out there, Mikey. The world is waiting for you, Mikey. And look, whether the fix is a vote or statehood, something has to happen. The problem is, inertia is a really powerful force. And opponents might say, well, we can't grant DC statehood, we'd have to change the Constitution. But we could do that. The whole point of amendments is to fix things that no longer make any sense. It's happened 27 times and counting. Others will say, well, hold on, we'd have to change the flag. But we could do that. I mean, sure, it would look slightly different, but we've been using a 51-star flag for this whole segment, and none of you have fucking noticed. So, you know, it wouldn't be a crazy thing. And yes, it would probably screw up the songs that we learned as children, but we could change those too. In fact, until DC's situation is fixed, we've taken the liberty of adding an amendment to that song. Would you like to hear it, boys and girls? Would you like to hear it? Come on, let's go, let's go. Hey, kids. How you doing? Good. Do you want to sing a song about the 50 states and the inequities inherent in living in our nation's capital? Yeah! Heck, let's do it, shall we? Okay.
Alabama and Alaska, Arizona, Arkansas, California, Colorado, Connecticut, and more. There are 50 states in total, and we'll sing their names with glee. But there's one place that gets shafted, and it's Washington, D.C.
That's great, kids. Now, be more specific about the problem.
All the rest of us can choose a path that we think is best, but any choice that D.C. makes is easily suppressed.
How?
'Cause some asshole with a rider who might live in Tennessee can destroy a needle program for preventing HIV.
It's true, it's horrifying, but it's true. What's a solution, do you think?
Let them have gun laws, let them have weed.
Why not?
Let them decide the things that they need.
And if you're totally convinced that there should be just 50 states...
Well, then let's all kick out Florida, 'cause no one thinks they're great.
Oh, yes, let's all kick out Florida, 'cause no one thinks they're great. Thinks they're great. That's our show. Thank you so much for watching. Thanks to all the kids. We'll see you next week. Good night.